Oh, last thing. You're a team. The only 10 in Toulouse now. So you have one chance to get one.
So just to start, today we have two directors of the Eclipse Foundation. So Ralph Muller and Ian Skerett, with Vice President Marketing of the Eclipse Foundation. So Ian will present us how it works, how Eclipse works, how the Eclipse Foundation managed to be so
successful.
Thank you, Gael. And thank you and welcome. And I'm very happy to see that there's actually sunshine in Toulouse. I arrived Monday and I was hoping to see the beautiful city, but it was pouring rain, and the hotel gave me an umbrella which promptly broke because of the gust of winds coming through the city. So it's very nice to be here. This is my first time in Toulouse, and it's great food. So I've been enjoying the food, not the scenery, but the food. So, as Gael said, I do the marketing for the Eclipse Foundation, and what I wanted to do today was the title of the talk is How Eclipse Works. So I'm not going to talk about debugging or code inspectors and stuff like that. It's not kind of how to use Eclipse. What I want to talk about is what I think are some of the best practices that Eclipse has evolved and developed over the number of years around open source, and how we're seeing industries using these best practices for really doing collaborative development and open innovation. So we'll go through this, and certainly if there's questions, we can take it throughout, or I'm going to be here all day, so I'd be happy to chat with you afterwards too. So just a quick look at the agenda, just do a bit of introduction to Eclipse. Talk about some of the engineering processes, how Eclipse works in terms of releasing software and developing software, and then go into more of the business side of how companies should start, we think companies should start thinking about open source and leveraging open source in terms of doing the collaborative development, and then finish up with industry working groups. I think I have half an hour, so we'll get into it. So often when people first come to open source and Eclipse, it's really kind of, there's lots of questions about, is it really that chaotic? Is like, how does the community work? How do things actually get done in open source? A lot of people still kind of view it as the source forge and some guy scratching the itch to do something that they really want to do. But I think over the years, open source has become much more mature, and really is at the heart of the software industry right now. So hopefully by the end of the presentation, we'll answer a lot of these questions and show kind of the mature best practices that we have. So a quick introduction. Most people know of Eclipse as probably one of the leading development communities out there. A lot of people come to Eclipse or have come to Eclipse from using it as the Java development tool, Java IDE, but we're seeing more and more come from the system engineering or C++ perspective, using our C tools, PHP tools. And over the years, we see this consistent growth in terms of our downloads. And in the last year or so, it's even getting faster. So there's a huge interest in using Eclipse and developing tools around Eclipse, and just this strong, vibrant community. And I don't think it's an exaggeration, but to say that Eclipse is really one of the dominant development communities in kind of the closest competitor would be the Visual Studio area. So it's quite a well-established community, We probably have between 6 and 8 million users of Eclipse. We get somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 million downloads a month from our website. When we do a release, that spikes way up. So it's quite an impressive community. And one of the things I think that really differentiates Eclipse from a lot of other open source communities is we actually have a strong focus on an ecosystem, and especially a commercial ecosystem. So we have thousands of products built on top of Eclipse, using Eclipse, and we think that's good. It's actually in our bylaws to nurture and encourage companies to use our technology. To us, success is when Airbus uses Eclipse to build Topcase. Or IBM actually has over 500 commercial products built on top of Eclipse. So that's a success factor to us. But it's also products, but also services. Companies like Obeo and Idamis are very important into the ecosystem of helping companies use Eclipse in their commercial setting. So we have a very large ecosystem that we're very proud of and work at nurturing. The way the foundation is funded and organized is through membership. So companies join us as members of the foundation and support it. So we have 185 member companies. 11 of them are what we call strategic members. And these companies are what form our board of directors, the bulk of our board of directors that we have. And then one of the things when I first started Eclipse, because Eclipse came out of IBM, I think it's important to note that IBM just has one seat at the board. There's no special privilege for IBM at Eclipse. And so I do not work for IBM. I work for the Eclipse Foundation. And that's a very important statement from a vendor-neutral perspective. If you want to have successful open collaboration and open innovation, a lot of companies working together, no one company can have a special seat or a special privilege in the community. And the foundation's definitely been set up like that. We have what are called committers. So these are the developers that actually do the work and do the code development. And we have over 1,000 committers working on over 270 different open source projects. So a lot of people come to us and think of us just Java development tools. We actually have a very wide breadth of technology at Eclipse and in forms of over 270 different open source projects. The other thing that I think we're proud of, and rightly so, is our concept of a release train. So once a year for the past 8 years, we have done a release. And we do it the last Wednesday of June. And each year, this release train gets bigger and bigger. And so the idea is that the open source projects at Eclipse decide that they want to participate in this release. And the reason why we did the release train was to bring together the different projects that people are using and synchronize them on the common platform. So what we've done is all the way back to Eclipse 3, which was back in 2004, the release train gets bigger and bigger. And this, I think, is a great example of doing distributed development in the large scale. And we're going to go into a lot more detail on how this gets done. But last year, we shipped well over 46 million lines of code. There is probably in excess of 60 different development teams participating, and those developers come from close to 50 different companies. And we shipped all this on the same day, and we announced it well in advance, a year in advance, that we're going to do it. And we've done it for the last 8 years. So it's a pretty impressive track record that we're proud of, and I think it's interesting to look at how it gets accomplished, and we'll go into that. So just from kind of a summary, so Eclipse has millions of users. We're a very large community. We really focus on having the open source technology used in products, used in commercial products, used in other open source projects, and used internally. We've got around 1,000 committers that work on the technology. Lots of companies and projects involved. We do this with a predictable schedule, so it's important from a ecosystem perspective. If you have thousands of products and companies using Eclipse, being predictable is very important. We're a technology supplier to these companies. We want to be predictable, and that's what the release train have done. We actually are the only open source foundation I know of that actually scans all of the code that comes into our repositories, code repositories, and we look at that for intellectual property issues. So we're looking for license compatibility and copyright pedigree. So essentially we've established a set of best practices in terms of ensuring that the open source code that people use has good IP due diligence attached to it. And we're doing this with 15 employees at the foundation. So it's a small staff that we have at the foundation, but we think we get a lot done, and quite frankly, we're not doing most of this. It's the community that does this, and we'll go in and talk a bit about that. So how does things get done? And specifically, let's talk about the release train. And I think kind of this is the epitome of doing agile development in the large scale. Indigo was last year. This year on June 24th, I think it is Juno. Juno is going to be probably close to 60 million lines of code. Will be over 70 projects that will ship, and I'm pretty confident that it will ship on June 24th. So how do we make that happen? I think architecturally, one of the keys of this being successful, and especially from a distributed development perspective, is the modularity architecture that we have at Eclipse. So at the base is what we call a standard and a runtime called OSGI. Our implementation of OSGI is called Equinox. And everything at Eclipse is an OSGI bundle. And so what happens there is that we essentially establish a set of APIs that people can use and extend. But the key is that everyone's using the APIs, including the base platform. So everyone's a first-class citizen of hooking into the Eclipse platform. And this allows for each team to actually go away and independently build their functionality. And when it comes to integration, because they're using the set of published APIs, the public APIs, the integration becomes a lot easier. So I think from an architecture point of view, this is one of the success factors that we see kind of bringing together such a large code base on a single day. But, and this isn't kind of new, right? Having this plugin architecture is something that Linux has been very successful at. Apache and Mozilla have been very successful at. The other thing is that when we talk about the release train, you notice that 70 projects are probably going to participate this year, and we have 270. So we don't expect all the projects to participate in the release train. And in fact, it's opt-in. Projects decide themselves if they want to participate or not participate. And so there's really this life cycle of a project that we see and encourage them to go through, where they come in, they get created, and then they incubate and start to mature. And then once they hit maturity, then they start to think about participating in the release train. And equally important, we actually will archive and terminate projects that are no longer being actively developed. So actively looking at a life cycle and promoting the life cycle of a project is really important in terms of the expectations you set for those committers working on the project, but also from a community perspective of how mature the code base is and what you can expect from that code base. The other thing and to the of some of the founders of Eclipse is they spent a lot of time thinking about their development process. And so Eric Gamma and John Wiegand, who are some of the key architects, initial key architects of Eclipse, really developed this concept of the Eclipse way that they refined over the years of doing product releases of the Eclipse platform. And it starts with kind of some of the core rules around open source. And these aren't necessarily unique to Eclipse, but I think it's important to re-emphasize here. Open source projects, if the well-organized ones, have specific rules that everyone is expected to play by. They were actually highly structured. It's not anarchy. There's only certain people that can actually make decisions and commit code to the code repositories. Typically, those are code committers. There's people that are responsible for delivering the code, responsible for architecture. And this is all done in the public, so people know, the community will know who these people are and what their responsibilities are. So there are very much, can be very structured. And the other thing that I think a lot of people misunderstand is open source is not a democracy. Like everyone does not get a vote on what happens in an open source project. It's a meritocracy. It's the people that are actually doing the work that make the decisions. And so a lot of people kind of miss that it's not this free-for-all that anyone can decide what's going on. It's the actual code committers that make the decision based on meritocracy. But the thing is that from an openness perspective and transparency perspective, there's rules on how new people can become committers. So we are very much focused on bringing in new people into a project and a diversity of people into the project, because that really promotes the long-term health of an open source project. In terms of planning in this development process, I think the one thing, when I first started at Eclipse being the marketing guy, people would come to me and say, I really want this feature in the next release. And I go like, why are you talking to me about it? But from a traditional software vendor perspective, the marketing person often would be doing the feature list, right, for the next release. That's not how it works in open source. It's very much a bottom-up. There is some top-down, but the real benefit of the way we do our releases and way open source is really the bottom-up, where the people that are closest to the projects, the committers, are making the decisions and doing the planning. But the important thing is that this plan's alive. I think sometimes it gets frustrating that with the things will slip out of plan as we get closer to the release. It's a lot of iterations going on with the community and with what's able to get done as they put together the plan. And there's this constant understanding and identification of where the risks are. What are the dependencies? How do you isolate the risk, the high-risk areas? How do you isolate them from the dependencies to make sure that something doesn't actually slow down the whole release? So there's this constant evaluation and sandboxing these high-risk items to limit the impact. The other thing, and I think this is certainly has kind of been refined in the Agile community, but I think the whole idea of the project rhythm was something that Eclipse really has done quite well. And when they started out, the term hanging rope, right? When you started out a release, right, that if you were aiming for a date in 12 months' time, right, kind of your quality goes down as you're doing the work, and then you try and stabilize it, and then you kind of try and increase the quality to back up. And if you want to get community involvement in your project, going away and not doing a release for 12 months is not the best way to get feedback. And so what they came to was this project rhythm of 6-week milestones. And 6 weeks really turned out to be kind of the right length of time for a developer to do something interesting. But equally important was it was enough time to give the community a chance to download and give feedback. If you did it longer, then the community would lose interest and go away. If you did it shorter, the developer didn't have enough time to actually do the plan, the execution, the test, and the release. So what Eclipse has done, and we continue to do, is this 6-week milestones. And that really has set up, and back to predictability, now the entire community knows what the release schedule is going to be. And I guarantee you, when we do on June 24th the release, in 6 weeks' time, there's going to be another release. It'll be milestone 1 for the following year. And there won't be very much in it, but it'll definitely be coming out. But the idea is you're doing something that's good enough for the community to download and test out. Continuous integration is almost a natural now for a lot of development shops. But Eclipse, it's depending on the project, we do nightly, weekly, and the milestone builds. And so it's this constant testing of the integration that really helps. So when you get to the release date, it's not the first time you've done it. And I think that's really the key is when we do the release on June 24th of this year, this will not be the first time we've released the entire release train, the 70 projects. We'll have done it probably, 11 times before that, right? So each time, each milestone, we were actually practicing during the release. Now, early in the early milestones, the lag between the projects having to be ready is measured in days and weeks. So what we do is we have kind of what a +1, +0, +1, +2, +3, which is really saying kind of what are the dependencies the projects have on other projects. And so when early in the cycle, the expectation is they'll be ready within days and weeks. At the end, they're ready at the same time. And so we're narrowing the kind of the lag as we go and get better. But the idea is we're practicing. And we're also building in all the projects into a shared repository so anyone in the community can come down and give feedback and do testing on what they want from the different projects. In terms of community involvement, Gail I'm hoping someone was going to give me a time warning, but I don't see Gail. Okay. So in terms of community involvement, certainly, I think one of the major benefits of doing open source development is getting early feedback and quick feedback. And it's a give and take. The developers have to spend time. It's an investment that the developers have to do. They have to kind of take the feedback. It's sometimes can be quite brutal in terms of how people communicate about what they don't like and don't like. But what also happens is that the community will start to help out in answering other people's questions and providing test cases, providing bug fixes, patches. So it's this give and take that starts to develop as the project matures. And we see it over and over again that as the code matures, the community matures. But this is an important part of the process of making the release successful. So when we do the milestones and make them available, we'll get thousands of people downloading the milestones. I just looked at this morning and we have close to 10,000 downloads in the last week of M7, right? So we're getting that feedback. People are doing the testing and providing the feedback early during the cycle, and which is really important so when we get to the final day, it's of high quality. And I think the final thing is testing is incredibly important. We have a lot of automated test cases that go on and are executed for each release and nightly. So there's the unit test, there's the API conformance test, there's the code coverage test that get published, and the results get published in the open. So people can understand what the quality is. The developers, the committers can understand where their issues are. So it's important that this test environment is set up so, and kind of Mike Milinkovic uses the terms innovate with confidence. You can experiment because you know if you're going to break something, it's going to show up in the test case. So those are some of the key areas that we focus on in terms of providing the release train. So why does any of this matter? And I think that this is quite a rhetorical question, but I think if you're doing large-scale software development, things like cost, time to market really do matter. So is there anyone here from Boeing or Toyota? I didn't think so. So I wanted to pick some examples that wouldn't offend anyone in the audience, and I thought Boeing would be a good one. But software is becoming more and more important. And the quality of software is becoming more and more important. And so there's lots of examples of delays to large-scale system engineering projects due to quality. It seems like doing brake software is really hard because I just noticed both these examples are dealing with brake systems. So if you're developing brake systems, there's an opportunity. But I think, and we see this kind of with Airbus, the amount of software going into a plane is just exponentially growing. So these systems are becoming more software intensive. In the automotive industry, the innovation supposedly is coming more and more from the software. So software is just becoming more and more important. And how can you use some of the practices that we've learned in open source to make it more successful? And so obviously I'm biased, but why do an open platform? What's the driving motivation? And I think there's four. I really believe there's enough proof points out there that an open platform really drives the open innovation. I think we've seen this in the tools industry. We've seen this in the software middleware industry, where if you can get to a vendor-neutral community, you really can get multiple companies working together. And some of the key things, kind of side effects, are things like licensing. Don't become an issue anymore. You don't have lawyers doing one-on-one licensing agreements to share the intellectual property. There is a licensing framework in place around open source that makes it very easy to share the intellectual property. It's also really important to have an open source platform allows for people to experiment, allows people to adopt the technology very quickly, often without asking for permission. Right? And that's where you start to see the innovation coming from and we see this over and over again, the core group of developers will be working on the platform or the core technology, but every once in a while, some other people will pop up and say, oh yeah, we've done this really interesting thing, isn't this cool? And so people are adding to the value of that because the barriers to entry are very, very small. And then finally, I think this is a bit more subtle, but from an end user perspective, if you start to collaborate, and we're going to see some examples, if end users start to collaborate around open source, you can actually really start to disrupt your software supply chain. And you can start to control it more instead of vendors controlling the kind of how the software is integrated together. You can, the end users can have a lot more power over this. And I think really where it comes down to is the traditional software model is broken. That a lot of time and effort is, especially for software vendors, is focused on kind of the plumbing, the infrastructure. So how do you kind of multi-platform support going across different operating systems, different windowing systems? How do you build that up? And that the value that you're actually providing to the business is actually very small. And really what what we're seeing is that open source allows you to do the infrastructure in open source. You collaborate on the infrastructure that really isn't adding anything to your company's bottom line, and that you focus on the 20% value. So really, kind of from a business model perspective, you collaborate on the platform. You collaborate with your competitors or your peer end user companies, and then you compete on the value add that you're providing to the business. And so that's kind of the model that we see over and over again in open source, and I think the model that we're seeing come to more to different industries. So how do we get to that model? How do companies get there? I'm going to have to speed up a bit, but I might go over time a bit. But the open source maturity model is something that was developed at Carleton University in Canada. And we see this over and over again with companies. We don't see as many people denying open source anymore. 5 years ago, there were still people that would say that we will never use open source in our organization. We don't see that anymore. But essentially, a company goes through these stages where they start to use it, they start to contribute, and then champion, and then it kind of gets interesting where they start thinking strategically how they can use open source to better their business. So from an ISV perspective, it's pretty straightforward where they're using the open source to decrease their costs and time to market. They start to contribute back bugs because they just want to improve the software and the quality, to where they get more into the collaborate and refine, where they're really trying to define their market segment and change and disrupt their market. From an enterprise perspective, I think that the first three are still very applicable, but it kind of changes in the last area, where, for instance, in the automotive industry, can you create a platform for tool vendors to basically build on top of, right? So can you create an industry platform where your supply chain starts to think this is where they have to integrate, instead of them trying to be the integration point? And so that's where it starts to get interesting for the enterprise. So in conclusion, this is kind of where we're seeing where Eclipse is going, where end user companies have this opportunity to take some of these best practices that have been developed at Eclipse and in open source and start to build up these industry platforms. And so and I think the question is, how can you start to collaborate with your end user companies to build up a platform that will really start to change your software supply chain? So, one second. So what we're doing at Eclipse is we've developed the concept of industry working groups. And the idea of the industry working group is to really provide a governance structure where companies can come together in a vendor-neutral environment and start working together. And the focus of the working groups is to have the end users drive the initiative. We love software vendors, so the software vendors are a key importance to this, but the end users really need to drive it. And this is how to encourage the end users to start thinking about using open source and some of the best practices to get this collaboration going. Open source projects are still very important in terms of they are best suited for delivering code. So we still have the working groups work with the kind of the requirements and how things should architecturally look and how the community should be managed, and then they actually have input and provide resources to the open source projects. And so what the industry working groups really start to provide is take advantage of the Eclipse Foundation's legal and licensing framework. So in any industry collaboration, the first thing that people get involved are the lawyers to do all their agreements. With the industry working group, you don't need to worry about that. We have the licensing already done. We have the contribution agreements already done. We also, the industry working group, provide this vendor-neutral governance structure. And that's important, especially if you want competitors to work together. You can't see kind of a single bank having the final control point if you want some of the other competing banks to participate. What also the industry working groups and being part of the Eclipse community is leveraging these best practices that we talked about on how to do large-scale software development in a distributed manner. And then finally, from a technology point of view, what Eclipse provides is this architecture that enables that too, and enables this the concept of shared innovation, where different people can, and different groups can actually do some software development in isolation, provide it back to the community and get feedback and starts to work together. So we've got some I think we're going to hear quite a bit today about some of the working groups. But Gael talked about Polar Sys, which is really focused in the system engineering and avionics area about providing tool chain in that industry. A number of the companies here are involved in that. Another active working group is the automotive working group, where in Juno, they're actually going to deliver on our download page an automotive IDE And this is really the first step of defining this platform, where it's sending a message to the automotive tool chain of, this is your integration point. We're going to standardize on this package, and if we're going to be using your tool, your Eclipse-based tool, you need to integrate on this version and these components that are in that package. And then the final example is in the machine-to-machine space. Sometimes people refer to this as the Internet of Things. But again, and this space is really about how you create the standards of the protocols and the libraries to make it easy to have data flowing from different hardware devices back to different server environments. So we've got companies, IBM, Sierra, Eurotech, and Band 11, working on what it means to define a platform for enabling that machine-to-machine communication. So those are some of the examples that we have in the industry working groups. Certainly there's other ideas and other potentials that we're talking to. If you have an idea, please feel free to approach me, or Ralph Mueller. Has Ralph shown up? We need to introduce Ralph, I guess. Ralph is here someplace, but feel free to talk to him about this. Any quick questions? Yeah. One question, yeah. Okay, I know I was a bit over, but hopefully this was interesting, and enjoy the rest of the day. Gail, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.